Hello, I'm Wendy Purcell, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this session. And here we're going to really talk about what higher education needs to do to accelerate delivery of the SDGs. And so thank you very much for coming along. And that's a question, or that is the question that we're going to ask ourselves as we get into the dialogue, the important part of this session, and that co-creation that we're going to do in our discussions together. So thank you very much for joining. And I'm just going to do a little bit of scene setting with some slides just to give us some kind of ideas and some thoughts and some things to argue with or disagree with, or things that might just prompt some of our thinking today. So the first thing I wanted to do is just to remind us that really what we do here matters. You know, what higher education institutions do, universities and colleges, you know, what we do matters, whether it's our ability to convene other actors around problems, you know, this focus on solutions through our research and innovation, and clearly through our work in supporting students and indeed people throughout their lives, you know, as we enable their talents to emerge and contribute to society. So what we do here matters, and what you do here in this sector really does matter. So thank you for coming along today, and thank you for all that you do in supporting higher education. So with that, let's think about the context in which we're operating as a sector. We are buffeted, I think, by so many trends and so-called megatrends, whether it's technological change or clearly our focus around sustainability and that sense of a just transition. But there are all sorts of other things, you know, facing us, and there, you know, I think you can argue that there's always been change, and of course, you know, that's absolutely the case. But I think you know, my premise is very much that there hasn't been this quantum of change across so many different fronts at any one time, you know, such that this is the backdrop to our institutions, and we cannot fail to be influenced by the kind of the change, the number of fronts across which change is happening, and the sheer pace and scale. And on top of, you know, these kind of global megatrends that we know about, we've also just and are still in many parts of the world battling with the recent pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, as it's both revealed issues around inequities in society and accelerated change in so many ways. And I think we've seen that in some of the movements around, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Asian Lives Matter, this sense that these inequities have been revealed. There's a kind of global awakening that I think COVID-19 has been part of, as well as the kind of trends around digital, particularly in, say, higher education and in other sectors. You know, COVID has been an accelerant. It's also been an opportunity to kind of reveal some of these issues that we've known about, maybe some we haven't known about, and some that we've chosen to ignore. So there's a real sense of disruption happening across so many different fronts. So if we look at what a university, and I just use that term to capture higher education institutions, if we look at what universities are about, you know, across every facet of the university, we are being impacted and influenced and affected by a whole range of these global megatrends, from climate change to social justice issues, through to changes in delivery models and challenges around business models. So there's a real sense of disruption going on. Now we can kind of choose in some ways to be reacting to that disruption, or we can, you know, we can really think about that actually our new normal is a world which is, you know, so-called VUCA conditions. You know, we are operating in conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that's just how it is. That is the description of our present moment and going forward. So we have to learn how to operate within this sense of this VUCA environment as our normal. And I think this is, an interesting space then to kind of think about as we are receiving, different stimuli from these change axes and these different domains where change is happening, and we're responding to that stimulus. What I love about this quote is that there is a space between, receiving the stimulus and responding. And I think, as Viktor Frankl says here, in that space between stimulus and response is our power, and it's our power to choose how we respond. And that's where our growth, personal growth, and institutional growth, and our freedom lies. So this is a really important opportunity in many ways for higher education to remind itself and for us to remind ourselves what we're here for, our purpose in many ways, and to, rather than just simply react to these kinds of assaults in many ways, or these changes that are coming at speed, at pace, and many of them, maybe we kind of ground ourselves a little bit more and think about how do we choose to respond here. And let's think about, in that choice analysis, how we play in the SDGs in that space. And so when you look at what the SDGs stand for, the idea of creating a world where no one is left behind, this idea of inclusivity, of equity, of thinking about the way in which, the economic goals and the around the biosphere and the societal goals and those kind of planetary goals, that they are all nested. So that, as Ban Ki-moon put it, saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, and advancing economic growth are one and the same fight. And I think, as we look at how higher education is engaging with the SDGs, we can, in some ways get lost in the detail of 169 targets and 17 goals, and arguing as, we are academics. So this is our, this is what we do for a living, is argue that what's missing and what's not missing, and who was at the table and who wasn't. We can kind of get lost in some of that detail and fail to appreciate that this is, in fact, the nearest thing the world has to a strategy. 193 countries, the sense of these being priorities identified by a collective, and there being a time-bound nature to them. And I think recognizing the interdependencies of those agendas. And so the invitation here is, can we put on our SDG goggles, as I put it, and kind of look at universities, look at what we do as universities, and if we do that, what do we see? What do we see taking on our future journey? What should we be leaving behind? What should we cherish? What should we maybe be able to say, thank you, I appreciate your service, in that kind of Marie Kondo way, but and allow to move on. So this invitation, I think, is to say, let's take this collective sort of strategy for the world, a sense of shared purpose. Let's think about that, looking with those goggles on our institutions and the global reach that we have, and think about looking afresh, as Marcel Proust says here, of looking not in terms of seeking these new lands, but just looking with new eyes. Can we look with new eyes? And so Yeah, I think that's a nice way of thinking about this. So if we kind of, do the thought experiment in some ways and think about the SDGs as the university mission, can we recognize what we do, which is very distinctive from other organizations? We do teaching and learning, we do research and innovation, and we do other things around community service and engagement and civic activities. Can we look afresh at those pillars of what we do and don't think about tucking the SDGs into the other box? Can we think about the SDGs really being not this other agenda and maybe a third mission? Teaching is one, research is another, and this is somehow another thing to do. But can we look at the SDGs as the mission? Can we look at this as a way of delivering against the SDGs through our teaching and learning and through our research innovation and through our community and service endeavours as well? So can we think about it as being the lens through which we deliver against our mission as universities, but also that collective shared mission that the SDGs represent? And I think this is an interesting way to sort of think about how does this influence then the strategy of a university? Are we going to, in this kind of red ocean, blue ocean way? I really like the kind of imagery of this. Are we going to stand and kind of defend the current position of what we're not doing and go back to the kind of old normal? Or are we really going to seize this moment and start to innovate and pursue some new opportunities? And I think this framing around, can the SDGs be part of our blue ocean strategy as universities, so that rather than competing in this existing market space, we look to build out, in that kind of, from the kind of bloodied competition space or waters into this uncontested blue ocean, calmer kind of space where we can really differentiate our academic offer, our research, our programs. Can we, rather than just continuing to exploit the demand that we know about, can we capture new kinds of demand? Can we even create new demand for new kinds of research, inquiry, new programs, new courses? Can we really take this opportunity to see the collective of the SDGs, use that as the lens through which we look at our teaching, research and other activities, and actually use this then as our strategic kind of leap forward as part of the adaptation strategy for our institution? So that's just a thought. I like this red ocean, blue ocean framing. It helps us kind of see ahead and see those new things. So when we look at then this sense of a shared global purpose, maybe a shared institutional purpose, a mission, can we come together then to accelerate delivery against the SDGs and think about this value creation that we're involved with, because we are contributing as universities to the benefit of society. So it's a real sense of this as a shared purpose within an institution, a community of scholars and staff and students, but a broader shared sectoral purpose for higher education globally. And what interested me was seeing this headline is, how is this capturing or leaning into or really delivering against how our students are thinking about the world that they're living in and that they are going to move on and really take forward. And this is interesting that they are seeking in many ways this sense of purpose, of being impactful, and that this is going beyond simply choosing a college or a university just because it offers a particular major. They are looking for meaning, they are looking for purpose, and therefore this opportunity to join a community which is tasked to deliver against the kind of societal challenges of our day, as represented by the SDGs, becomes a compelling offer to prospective and current students, and indeed faculty and staff, about can you be part of this shared purpose as represented here. And I think that's, again, an interesting idea. So we know that the SDGs, we see them in these very neat kind of little boxes, 17 individual goals. And then I think it's really important that you look behind and see the kind of wiring of how not only nested, biosphere, society, economics, but how connected they are and how interdependent they are. So if you lift people into education, you're also lifting people out of poverty as you look to level up, as you look to it be inclusive. It has all sorts of knock-on effects around gender equality and the whole sense of a more balanced economy in many ways, and a more equitable one. And so I think that sense of interdependence, hyperconnectivity, as you look behind the SDGs, and can we reflect that complexity in some ways through the way that we think about our universities, and can we think about how can we connect not only within the institution, fields of study, academic subjects, research convenings, student programs, can we connect those through and recognize the interdependencies and connections among them as related to the SDGs? And can we also connect our universities to businesses, to the professions, to the society that we serve, and actually create what I'm calling here a kind of radical collaboration? And I think that radical collaboration can really focus internally. How do we create the environment, the structures, the incentives to enable people to be driven by purpose and also to be driven by their academic curiosity? And can we think of this sort of SDG connected university externally as well, as we join and maybe hold and convene some of these multi-actor partnerships that are so essential to delivering on the SDGs as an agenda. So we did a little bit of work. I'm just going to just comment on some work that might offer up some ideas to this discussion and our dialogue today, is how universities are very much that engine for transformational sustainability, and we think about them in this way, this construct of living labs, that we can leverage many of those assets with others. And so in that research paper, we identified 3 different university cases, very, very different. And I'm just going to literally touch on those because they were different ways into the agenda. And this was the reason for including this was to recognize the importance of mission-driven engagement with this agenda. I really believe it has to fit with the mission. So the door you choose to enter this space, there are many doors that you can come in and contextualize your approach to this space and the solutions that you need to deliver for your particular institution. There's a sense of bespoke engagement. So this is just a way of illustrating that with 3 very different universities. So the first one is the university that I led as a university president for 8 years, which is a kind of regional university in the UK. It's teaching and research, 30,000 students at that time, and how we were able to embed kind of sustainability as the broad construct, but alongside more entrepreneurial thinking in sort of deed and action, but to bring together a kind of convening vehicle within the university, which we called GAIN, which allowed us to connect the university with business and to connect the university with society. And it was a very powerful coalescence, if you like, of both the internal academic facing activities of the institution, very much focused around the student, as well as our external facing dialogue with city regional partners. And I think it was a very good case, really, in many ways, to show how new value was created, new income streams were developed, a differentiated mission, as well as a mission that accelerated the reputational gain of that institution at that time. So it was a whole institution model, but fueled by this what I call a second operating system, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute. This coalescence of internal and external facing group that we called GAIN, and I can talk about that if there's interest. Another one I was involved with was the American University in Bulgaria, where this was really an external partner through a business cohort of business kind of grouping around a particular sector, who really wanted to advance sustainability and engagement with the SDGs for and on behalf of their business sector, but really recognized that it needed the kind of knowledge base and the academic rigor of partnering with the university. And they partnered with the American University in Bulgaria, and this was a group of beverage companies that really relied on natural ecosystems and water courses, who came together from outside the institution and created a kind of user-led demand to and presented that really to the university, who then looked inside their academic assets and brought together a unique program, which was really to work with that group to create or co-create, as we put here, this thriving sustainable society for Bulgaria and beyond. And so it relied on a transformational leadership program, but drawing together from across the institution different kinds of knowledge, but focused around a particular sector, a particular ask, but externally driven, and how the university really leaned into and responded to that user-led demand in many ways for something new, something different. So that was the innovation force. And then into Harvard's own focus around its sustainability plan, and how that is really moving beyond now energy and operations, and thinking very deeply, I think, as the plan is iterated and a new plan is about to be launched around health, around well-being, around the culture of the institution, and also around the learning and the research that goes on there. So a real sense of very deliberate targets and engagements, but actually this reach beyond, deep into the heart of the institution. And so I wanted just to pause here and remind ourselves that we talk often about what do we need to do, as we're here to talk about today. What do we need to do to change? And then we kind of keep the conversation, as I've done as well, which is keeping it at the kind of institutional level. And I just wanted to remind ourselves that actually organisations don't change; it's people that change, and we probably don't do enough work in helping people change, helping each of us make these transitions, whether it's incremental, whether it's these big bang changes, but and recognizing how powerful our peer networks, our subject networks, our research networks, our learning networks with students, how powerful drawing on those networks to affect the kind of change that we want to see through our organizations, but reminding ourselves it's people, not some kind of abstract sort of sense of an organization, or write a strategic plan or something. It's actually individuals in the way that they speak and talk and act, the culture, how they're prioritizing, what they're choosing to spend their most precious asset on, their time. So these are some of the leadership challenges, I think, for our organizations, is recognizing how we can help facilitate this movement towards the SDGs. And I love Ronald Heifetz's model here, so from Harvard Kennedy School, who talks about that this is the kind of agenda that we're talking about here is very much an adaptive leadership challenge. So it's mobilizing people to face into this new reality. And the new reality here is, the opportunity to be part of a bigger movement around creating a world where no one is left behind. So how do we mobilize the people, students, faculty, staff, our alumni, our other stakeholders, to face into this new reality together and see the issue, see the problem. And something he talks about, which is really important that we often don't do, is recognizing what losses are involved here, and be very clear about those. So are we prepared to lose some of those things? It might be autonomy over our curriculum for a particular course. It might be individual courses themselves. It may be individual research projects, and understanding and acting compassionately about, there are, as well as, focusing on the gains and the opportunity to be part of that broader societal agenda, can we also recognize that change often is accompanied by loss, and honoring the heritage as we, build on those new horizons for our institutions. And so he's putting back, and it's something I want to bring into the discussion, is putting this onus back on leadership and contrasting, I think, very powerfully with the difference between technical challenges and how we use authority. And I think what I see in some institutions, in some of these change programs, I see kind of technical solutions being managed with authority, as opposed to leadership being exercised, because this is an adaptive challenge. And so, hopefully that difference comes across, so that we are dealing with an adaptive challenge, and therefore we need leadership to mobilize people. And that is a particular kind of way of working. And sometimes what you see when things are more difficult, you're seeing people actually dealing as if this is somehow a technical fix. We need to fix our institutions, and therefore we seek to use technical solutions and kind of authority to effect, change, which is not going to work over the long term. So I mentioned second operating systems before. So this is just to give us some examples of how do we affect change within institutions, recognizing it's people that change, and how can we create a kind of safe space to allow for innovation to happen within an organization that's pretty bounded, is often hierarchical in nature, has structures. And actually, the reason that universities have been around so long, we are good at withstanding change and being resilient in the face of change, but we also want to experiment and be innovative. And so how can we protect fragile innovation and new ways of doing things so they can get to a level of impact and scale, so that the institution, if you like, doesn't kill it off? And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the idea of antibodies to change within organizations. This is not peculiar to universities by any means, but can we create internally some kind of safe zones or holding vehicles that allow this fragile new way of operating to live long enough to impact the corpus of the institution? So the framing I'm using here is second operating system. So I mentioned one, which was GAIN, which was a coalition, no new structures developed in terms of departments or anything else, but a coalition of the willing in many ways, which was internal to the organization, which created space for people outside the organization to also come together and feel part of an entity, and therefore allow it to navigate the university systems and hierarchies in a way that was more fluid, a way that was more permissive of innovation. And then once it was of a sufficient scale and impact, that could then be absorbed into the body of the institution. Another one that I touched on, and I'll mention a couple of papers that we've produced, is at the University Polytechnica in Madrid, UPM, where again they have a very sort of structure called ITD within the institution, which it does not disturb any of the academic architecture around faculties and schools, departments, but is a way of creating a kind of a revolving door, if you like, with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders who can come together through this vehicle of ITD to create and innovate, and come together and bring the outside in, as well as bringing what's inside the institution to those outside the institution. So again, a really nice example. And then Georgia Tech, who've embraced wholly through the president there, President Cabrera, this idea of engagement with the SDGs and how they're taking a whole institution framework there. And then McGill, that's using a kind of new capital project to take a heritage building and create kind of new horizons which are around sustainability in the broadest construct. So some nice just examples that I know of, I'm involved with, that would be nice just to share with you, just to sort of springboard us into some of our discussions. So UPM, so the University Polytechnica in Madrid, have looked at, and our papers in press now, which is thinking about how did a convening of largely faculty come together and talk about a program that they wanted to see and co-develop, how the structural innovation around ITD, so a kind of a holding vehicle within the institution, how those two things came together to allow the SDGs to be very much a fuel for transformation, for change, for innovation. And so really recognizing that there were two kind of vehicles. One was this kind of structural vehicle, ITD, which was a kind of holding space for this, and one was an academic vehicle. So you're creating spaces where conversations could happen, co-working could happen, dialogue could happen, and actually how that led then to this broader kind of network of networks as the university drew in other partners then to participate in a transformational partnership, which again had the SDGs as a focus, to step up and lean into seizing the day around COVID-19 and the disruption and responding to that at speed. So a couple of nice manuscripts, Ray, that gives some insight into some solutions and models that might have some resonance for some of those in the room. McGill, I mentioned, who are taking the old Vic project into a new Vic project. So this is the heritage building just adjacent to the campus there, and thinking about how a whole institution, McGill Sustainability Systems Initiative, with different faces to that, which thematically align with research interests and engagement, and really think about how this opportunity to recommission the building and to do some future thinking about priorities, about research, about programs, and how that's creating, again, a vehicle, a dialogue space for some of these new thinking, some of this new thinking to happen. Georgia Tech, I mentioned, where under the president's leadership and very much, fueled by that president, is really advancing a framework to embrace the SDGs, recognizing the organizational transformation that needs to go on across all those spheres of research, from research to teaching, operations, and so on. How all of that is very much part of this framing. And so this idea of a second operating system is, how do you draw together a coalition of the interested parties around a shared purpose, a shared interest, and support it sufficiently at an institutional level to allow it to experiment, to thrive, to enable the kind of change that you need to see. And short peer-to-peer influencing is then captured, and really high levels of engagement are captured. So there's lots of very good things that emerge from that allow innovation to happen. And then I think the other space that's just so critical is how we engage students as partners in this transformation and engagement around the SDGs. So seeing students as a huge enabler of this opportunity, not only while they're with us during their programs, but actually as a lifelong relationship with them as alumni, as they move on and we become networked into their networks. But seeing that student force as being a really important part of this innovation pathway that we're talking about as we look at the SDGs and what we as universities need to do. How can we better harness this energy? How can we really meet their expectations around being, graduates in this next normal that's very much defined by Agenda 2030 and beyond? We took a little look at some of these issues when there was, with the COVID-19 disruption I mentioned at the top, which is, how can we separate out this kind of immediate reaction, that we have to a crisis? How can we then think about how we respond more deliberatively to a crisis? And then can we go even further and start to reimagine our institutions and renew them in many ways? And can we use, the SDGs as a way of navigating these conversations, navigating this disruption? So we looked across different domains within institutions, from leadership through to partnerships, and thought about, what does reacting look like? What does responding look like, when we're more deliberative about it? And can we actually engage in some future gazing, future casting around reimagining and renewing our institutions? So I'll share that with you if that's of interest. And then a couple of other resources. SDSN Network Guide for Education was launched just last year, and I think talks about the kinds of things we can do to accelerate this transition that we're discussing here today. And in that, we touch on the second operating systems that I mentioned earlier. And then this I've only come across recently, but very excited about, the way that 17 Rooms in the Brookings Institute is convening these dialogue spaces across all 17 SDGs, and now they've moved into 17 Zooms, with our sort of lockdown through COVID, but a really nice way of spurring action to recognise that universities are really wanting to engage in these conversations. They want to find ways that make sense to them, contextual their mission, a nice way of kind of facilitating those kinds of conversations and convening. So it's a nice resource. And then we have coming up, I think later on this year, it will be submitted, that'll be out the following year, is Bloomsbury's seminal handbook of sustainability in higher education, and really seeing this as an agenda for transformational change. That's the lens that we've put on that book, and we're going to look and showcase some institutional exemplars around whether it was driven by the institution or by activities outside the institution, how universities are anchor or placemakers, and sorts of things that really help drive the systems level change that we're looking at. And then into just an upcoming, which from probably 22-3, we're launching through Emerald a series of 17 books, which I have the pleasure to be series editor, called Higher Education and the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is an invitation really to be part of that kind of movement of pulling that book series together and signaling your interest as authors and editors. So it's very much an open invitation to reach out to me if you want to be part of that really that book series, which we'll be putting through over the next kind of 5 or 6 years. So very exciting project, and grateful thanks to Emerald for championing that. And so just to finish then, our call to action really is that, and this kind of frames our dialogue now, is that universities, higher education institutions are vital to this agenda in terms of delivering the SDGs. We have the privilege of being locally rooted and globally connected, so placemaking, anchor institutions, as well as global networks through our student body, through our research, through our faculty, and how we can position the SDGs to be very much contextualized to our strategic academic mission, and therefore there is a kind of personalization, there is a sort of strategic lens we need to apply here. And then how can we think about what would work within our institutions if we need to have some holding vehicle that can be that kind of innovation hub in some ways, some way of holding change and enabling people to become experimental, to really think about new ways of operating that don't disturb a whole institution system at that point, but allow an institution to absorb change as it comes through and makes sense. And then this, as I mentioned, this idea of radical collaboration, both internally and externally, and the power of working with our students, working with our stakeholders, and working with each other, frankly. And that's what's great about this convening today that brings so many of us together. So I'm going to stop talking now. I appreciate your patience, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And as we are here to convene now to try and tease away at this question: what does higher education need to do to accelerate delivery of the SDGs? So I've given us some hints and some ideas, some things you might agree with or disagree with, and hopefully just a prompt to showcase and share some of your thoughts and ideas, things that you've seen working or not working, and really that we can co-create an answer to this really important and powerful question that we've posed here together. So thank you for your engagement, and now I'm looking forward to stopping the screen and to having our discussions. So I'm going to stop sharing now, invite you to contact me, of course, and then we'll get into discussion. Thanks very much. Okay. Thank you. See you in a moment.